The camera fades in, capturing the quiet stillness of a small, family-owned business on the corner of a modest neighborhood street. The glow from a street lamp casts long shadows against the storefront, reflecting off the large glass windows that proudly display the name **James and Sons Auto Repair. ***, a symbol of hard work, resilience, and the American dream. But tonight, something feels off. The usual warmth of this place is gone, replaced by something ugly, something hateful. Spray-painted slurs to face the once pristine walls, vulgar words dripping in fresh paint like open wounds on the heart of this business. The front window, shattered. Pieces of glass glint like tiny daggers on the pavement, crunching under the weight of the boots of an approaching figure. A man stands there, his expression unreadable. Strong, silent, taking in the destruction before him. His name is Marcus James a former Marine, a father, a son, and the proud owner of this shop. He built this place from the ground up after years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now, in one cruel night, that hard work has been disrespected, his livelihood treated like nothing more than a target for hatred. But Marcus doesn't break. He steps forward, his broad shoulders squared, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. The anger simmering beneath his calm exterior is not unfamiliar. It's the kind of anger that once kept him alive on the battlefield, the kind that demanded discipline instead of recklessness. He's seen worse. He's survived worse. And whoever did this, they have no idea who they just messed with. The security cameras, Marcus installed them himself. He walks inside, ignoring the crunch of broken glass under his boots, and taps a few buttons on the small monitor behind the counter. The footage rewinds, pixelated figures appearing on the screen. A group of young men, their faces mostly obscured by hoodies and masks, laughing as they deface his property. They think they're untouchable, that no one will hold them accountable. They're wrong. Marcus watches, his sharp eyes catching every detail, how they move, the way one of them nervously checks over his shoulder while another eggs him on. He doesn't recognize them, but he knows their type. Cowards, the kind of people who only act tough in the dark when they think no one's watching. But Marcus was trained to see what others miss. He memorizes the way they stand, their gestures, their builds. Clues. And then there's something else. A glimpse of a tattoo on one of their wrists as he raises a can of spray paint. A mark. Marcus leans closer. His mind is already working, piecing things together. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a bunch of kids causing trouble. This was personal. And now Marcus has a choice. Call the police, let them handle it. Or take matters into his own hands, the way he's always been trained to do. He exhales slowly, his breath steady. This isn't just about property damage. This is about standing up, about showing these thugs that hate has no place here. But first, he needs to find them. And when he does, they're going to learn a lesson they'll never forget. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. The air in his shop smelled of paint, shattered glass, and something else, something bitter. The stench of hatred, of ignorance. He had faced many enemies before, but those had been on distant battlefields, in places where war had rules, where there was a clear enemy and a clear mission. This was different. This was home. He turned away from the monitor, rubbing his jaw as he thought. The footage had given him something to work with, but not enough. He needed more. His instincts told him that these punks were local, that they had done this before. The way they moved, the way they acted, it wasn't their first time. Marcus wasn't the type to run to the police for every little thing. He had spent years learning how to handle problems himself, how to assess a situation, how to take action. But this wasn't just about him. His business wasn't just a paycheck, it was a symbol. It was proof that no matter how hard things got, no matter what was stacked against him, he could carve out his own place in the world. That was what they were trying to take from him. He couldn't let that happen. Stepping over the broken glass, Marcus reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. The line rang twice before a voice picked up. "Marcus," the deep voice greeted. "Didn't expect to hear from you this late." "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Something happened. I need your eyes on something." There was a pause. Then, "I'm on my way." Marcus hung up and slid the phone into his pocket. If there was anyone who could help him figure this out, it was Dante Morales. Dante wasn't just a friend, he was family. They had served together, shared foxholes, watched each other's backs in the kind of places that made men question everything they knew about the world. When Marcus got out, Dante had gone into private security, using his skills in a different way. The man had connections, people who knew things, people who saw things. If anyone could help him get to the bottom of this, it was Dante. While he waited, Marcus walked through the shop, taking in the damage. The graffiti stretched across the walls like an ugly scar. Words meant to cut deep, meant to send a message. He ran a hand over one of them, the paint still tacky under his fingertips. They thought they could scare him. They thought wrong. A few minutes later, the low rumble of an engine pulled up outside. Marcus glanced out the window and saw Dante stepping out his black SUV, his sharp eyes already scanning the area. The man was built like a linebacker, his presence alone enough to make most people think twice. "Marcus," Dante greeted, stepping inside and glancing around. His expression darkened as he took in the damage. "Damn, who did this?" Marcus jerked his head toward the back. "Come see for yourself." He led Dante to the security monitor, rewinding the footage and letting it play. Dante watched in silence, his sharp gaze picking up on every little detail, the same way Marcus had. "Amateurs," Dante muttered. "Sloppy, but they're local. You can tell by the way they act, comfortable, like they don't think anything's gonna happen to them." Marcus nodded. "That's what I was thinking. You see that tattoo?" He tapped the screen, pausing the footage at just the right moment. "Recognize it?" Dante leaned in, studying it. His expression shifted slightly, his jaw tightening. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I've seen it before. It's connected to a group. Nothing big, nothing organized. Just a bunch of idiots who think they're tough." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Then we find them." Dante looked at him, measuring. "You sure you want to go down this road?" Marcus met his gaze. "They came for me, in my own place. I'm not letting that slide." Dante studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's start asking around." The next morning, Marcus stepped out of his house with a purpose. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. But his mind wasn't on the beauty of the morning. It was on what needed to be done. Dante had made a few calls overnight, pulling strings, talking to people who had their ears to the ground. They had a lead, nothing concrete, but enough to start with. A name had come up. Ethan Harper. Marcus didn't know him, but he knew his type. Young, reckless, someone trying to prove himself to the wrong people. According to Dante's sources, Ethan had been seen hanging around a certain bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where trouble had a way of finding people. Marcus wasn't looking for trouble. But if trouble came his way, he'd be ready. By the time he arrived, the bar was just opening, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hanging in the air. A few early drinkers sat hunched over the counter, their gazes flicking toward Marcus as he walked in. He ignored them. His focus was on the bartender, a middle-aged man with tired eyes who had seen more than his fair share of bad nights. Marcus approached the bar, placing a 20 on the counter. "Looking for Ethan Harper," he said simply. The bartender eyed the bill, then Marcus. "Who's asking?" "Someone who wants to have a conversation." The bartender hesitated, then sighed. "Kid was here last night. Don't know where he is now." Marcus nodded. "If he comes back, let him know Marcus James is looking for him." The bartender gave him a long look, then nodded. "Yeah, I'll do that." Marcus turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. He knew the message would get back to Ethan. And when it did, The night air was cool against Marcus's skin as he stepped out of the bar. He could feel eyes on him, the way people had turned quiet the moment they heard Ethan Harper's name. That told him one thing: he was on the right track. People like Ethan didn't just move in the shadows, they thrived on the silence of those around them, on the way fear kept folks from speaking up. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to Dante. **** got a name. Ethan Harper. People here know something but won't talk ****. Almost instantly, his phone buzzed. ****, heard of him. Punk's got a record. Nothing serious, but enough to show a pattern. Street fights, vandalism, couple of minor charges that never stuck. Lies with his mom over on Franklin Street. You want to pay him a visit ****. Marcus exhaled slowly, watching as the streetlights flickered overhead. Confronting Ethan directly might get him some answers, but he had to be smart about it. If this kid was part of something bigger, pushing too hard too soon could send the others underground before Marcus had a chance to figure out who was really pulling the strings. He typed back, ****, not yet. Let's see what we can dig up first ****. Pocketing his phone, he walked back to his truck, his mind working through the angles. Ethan was just one piece of this. He needed to understand the whole picture before making his next move. Back at his shop, Marcus got to work cleaning up the damage. He wasn't going to let this keep him from opening his doors. By morning, the worst of the mess had been cleared, glass swept away, the hateful words on the walls scrubbed as much as possible. But even with the shop looking better, Marcus knew the scars of the attack ran deeper. His son, ****, came by in the afternoon, his face tight with worry. Jalen was 22, in college studying business. He had grown up in the shop, helping his dad on weekends, learning the trade even though he had his own dreams. "You sure you're okay?" Jalen asked, looking around. "I saw the pictures. This wasn't just some random act." Marcus set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag. "Yeah, I know. I'm handling it." Jalen's jaw clenched. "Dad, come on. Handling it how? These guys, whoever they are, they're out there, thinking they got away with this." Marcus met his son's eyes, seeing the anger there, the same anger he had felt when he first saw the damage. But he also saw something else: concern. Jalen had always been protective of his family, just like Marcus had been at his age. "I'm being smart about this," Marcus said. "I don't act without a plan." Jalen exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I just don't get it. Who does this? I mean, what do they get out of it?" Marcus didn't have an answer, at least not one that would make sense. Hate didn't follow logic. It didn't have a reason that could be understood. It just existed, festering in the minds of weak people, waiting for an excuse to surface. A knock at the door pulled them from their conversation. Marcus glanced at Jalen before moving to answer it. When he opened the door, he found Lisa Parker standing there, holding a Tupperware container. Lisa owned the bakery down the street. She had been one of the first people to welcome Marcus when he opened his shop years ago. They weren't close, but there was always mutual respect between them. "I heard what happened," Lisa said, offering the container. "Brought you something. Figured you might not have had time to eat with everything going on." Marcus gave her a small smile and accepted it. "Appreciate it." Lisa hesitated, shifting on her feet. I wanted to tell you something. I don't know if it's important, but I was closing up late last night, and I saw a group of kids down by the alley near my shop. I didn't think much of it at the time, but after I heard about what happened here, I don't know, maybe it was them." Marcus's attention sharpened. "You recognize any of them?" Lisa shook her head. It was dark, and they were wearing hoodies. But one of them, he had this nervous energy, like he didn't want to be there. He kept looking around, like he was afraid of getting caught. Marcus nodded. That made sense. In a group like this, there was always one who wasn't fully committed, who wasn't as far gone as the others. And those were the ones who usually cracked first. Thanks, Lisa, he said. That helps. She gave a small smile. Be careful, Marcus. These kinds of people, they don't always stop at just one incident. After she left, Jalen crossed his arms. So what now? Marcus set the Tupperware down and grabbed his jacket. Now we start putting pressure in the right places. That night, Marcus and Dante sat parked outside a rundown house on Franklin Street. According to Dante's sources, this was where Ethan Harper lived. The porch light flickered weakly, and an old truck sat in the driveway, its tires bald, its body covered in rust spots. Kids probably inside, Dante murmured. What's the play? Marcus stared at the house, thinking. He wasn't here to rough Ethan up, wasn't here to scare him into silence. That wasn't his style. What he needed was information, and the best way to get that, make Ethan feel like the walls were closing in. We wait, Marcus said. And they did. Hours passed, the neighborhood growing quieter as the night stretched on. Then, just past midnight, movement. The front door creaked open, and Ethan stepped out, pulling his hoodie over his head. He glanced around nervously before heading down the sidewalk, moving with a kind of speed that suggested he didn't want to be seen. Marcus and Dante exchanged a look before slipping out of the car and following at a distance. Ethan walked 3 blocks before ducking into a gas station. Marcus and Dante waited outside, watching through the window as the kid grabbed a soda and some chips, his hands twitchy, his eyes darting around. He was on edge. When Ethan stepped back outside, Marcus moved. He didn't grab him, didn't block his way. He just stepped in front of him, his presence alone enough to make the kid freeze. Ethan's eyes went wide. I don't want any trouble, man. Then let's talk, Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. Ethan swallowed hard, looking around like he wanted to run, but he knew better. He glanced at Dante, then back at Marcus. I didn't want to do it, Ethan said, voice shaking. I swear, man, I didn't. Marcus stayed silent, letting him talk. It wasn't my idea, Ethan continued. They said it was just a message, just something to. He cut himself off, clamping his mouth shut like he had already said too much. Marcus stepped closer, his voice steady. Who are they, Ethan? The kid shook his head. I can't. You can. Ethan hesitated, his breathing shallow. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, If I talk, they'll come after me. Marcus held his gaze. And if you don't talk, I'll keep coming back. Every night, every day, until you do. Ethan swallowed again, looking down at the pavement. He was trapped, and he knew it. Finally, he exhaled shakily and muttered a name. And just like that, the pieces started falling into place. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper, but the name he muttered hit like a hammer. ***, Ryan Calloway ***. Marcus let the name sit in the air for a moment, watching Ethan's face. The kid was scared, really scared. His hands twitched, his leg bounced slightly, and his eyes darted between Marcus and Dante, like he was waiting for them to tell him he'd made a mistake. Dante let out a low whistle, rubbing his jaw. Calloway, huh? That explains a lot. Marcus already knew the name. Ryan Calloway had a reputation, not just in the streets but in the shadows. He wasn't some small-time thug like Ethan. He was the kind of guy who stayed just out of reach, who let others do the dirty work while he kept his hands clean. He had connections, influence. A dangerous man, not because he was tough, but because he was smart. Marcus took a step closer, lowering his voice. Ethan, listen to me. Why Calloway? Why did he send you and your friends after my shop? Ethan hesitated, his breath shaky. I don't know, man. He didn't tell us why. Just said it was time to send a message. Marcus's jaw clenched. That wasn't good enough. Dante crossed his arms. So what, you guys just follow orders like sheep? No questions asked. Ethan looked down, shame flickering across his face. I didn't want to do it, he murmured. I swear I didn't. But Calloway, man, you don't say no to him. People who do, they don't. They don't end up in good places. Marcus exchanged a glance with Dante. That was the problem with guys like Calloway. They built their power on fear, on control. The people around them were too afraid to push back, too afraid to stand up. But Marcus wasn't. He took a slow breath. Where can I find him? Ethan shook his head quickly. No way. I can't tell you that. If he finds out I even talked to you, he swallowed hard. It won't end well for me. Marcus didn't take his eyes off the kid. Ethan, listen to me. You think Calloway's gonna protect you? That he cares what happens to you? The second you become a liability, you're done. You already know that. Ethan's lips pressed together. He knew Marcus was right. For a long moment, the only sound was the buzzing of a street lamp overhead. Then finally, Ethan exhaled. There's a warehouse, he muttered. Edge of town, off River Road. It's not his main spot, but he meets people there sometimes. That's where we got our orders. Marcus nodded. It was a start. Dante gave Ethan a hard look. If you're lying. I'm not, Ethan cut in quickly. I swear. Marcus studied him one last time before stepping back. Go home, Ethan. And if Calloway or anyone else comes looking for you, you didn't see us. You didn't talk to us. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He nodded rapidly, and all but ran down the street, disappearing into the night. Dante exhaled, watching him go. You really think that kid's gonna keep his mouth shut? Marcus's expression was unreadable. Doesn't matter. We got what we needed. Dante grunted. So what's the plan? Marcus glanced toward the distant city's skyline, his mind already working. We pay Calloway a visit. The drive to the warehouse was quiet, tension thick in the air. Marcus kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was sharp, focused. He had dealt with men like Calloway before, cowards who hid behind others, who thrived on intimidation. But intimidation only worked if the other person let it. As they neared the warehouse, Dante pulled up some information on his phone. Calloway's smart. No direct ties to anything, but everyone knows he's behind half the stuff that goes down in this city. Marcus nodded. Then we make sure he knows this time. He messed with the wrong person. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the night sky. Marcus pulled off a block away, killing the engine. They didn't need to announce themselves just yet. Dante scanned the area. Lights on. Means someone's inside. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Then let's go introduce ourselves. They moved quietly, years of training making their steps instinctive. As they approached, Marcus could hear voices. Low, muffled. Someone was inside, all right. Dante pulled out a small knife, rolling it between his fingers. We going in loud or quiet? Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at the warehouse, listened to the way the voices carried, the way the wind whistled through the gaps in the old metal siding. This wasn't just some random hideout. This was a place where business was handled, where Calloway made sure things went his way. Finally, Marcus exhaled. We go in smart. They slipped around the side, finding a door that had been left slightly ajar. Inside, the space was dimly lit, a few overhead bulbs casting long shadows. Stacks of crates lined the walls, the scent of oil and metal thick in the air. At the far end, a group of men stood gathered around a table, and in the center of it all, Ryan Calloway ***. Marcus took a step closer, his presence finally catching their attention. The men turned, their conversations halting. Calloway's eyes flickered with surprise for only a second before he smirked. Well, look who decided to drop by. Marcus met his gaze, his expression unreadable. You and I need to have a conversation. Calloway leaned back against the table, his smirk never fading. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you just made a mistake, friend. Dante shifted slightly, his stance ready, but Marcus remained still. His voice was calm, controlled. The only mistake made was you thinking I was someone you could push around. The tension in the room was thick. The men around Calloway exchanged glances, waiting to see how this would play out. Calloway chuckled, shaking his head. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you don't get it, do you? This," he gestured around, "this is bigger than you. Bigger than your little shop. You should have taken the message and walked away." Marcus's expression didn't change. "You see, that's where you messed up. You thought I'd just roll over. Thought I'd let you and your boys do whatever you wanted." He took a slow step forward. "But I don't scare easy, and I don't forget." Calloway's smirk faltered just a little. That was all Marcus needed to see. "I'm gonna give you one chance," Marcus continued, his voice low. "You're gonna tell me why you sent your people after me, and then you're gonna make sure it never happens again." Silence. Then Calloway laughed. It was a slow, mocking sound, but Marcus could hear the edge underneath it. "You really think you can just walk in here and start making demands?" Calloway shook his head. "You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus held his gaze, unflinching. "Neither do you." The room was thick with tension. The men around Calloway shifted, their hands hovering near their belts, near their pockets. A storm was coming, and Marcus was ready for it. A tense silence filled the warehouse, thick like the air before a storm. Marcus didn't move. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence was enough to make the men around Calloway hesitate. He could see it in the way their hands hovered near their belts, the way their eyes darted toward their boss, waiting for the signal. But Calloway wasn't as sure of himself as he wanted to appear. The smirk on his face was thinner now, stretched over something more fragile. Marcus had seen that look before, on men who thought they were untouchable, right before they realized they weren't. Calloway exhaled, pushing off the table. "I'll admit you've got nerve," he said, tilting his head. "But you're out of your league, old man. You think you can just walk in here and what? Scare me? Get me to back down?" Marcus didn't flinch. His voice was calm, steady. "I don't need to scare you, Calloway. I just need you to understand one thing." Calloway raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Marcus took a slow step forward. "You picked the wrong man to mess with." A flicker of something, uncertainty, passed through Calloway's eyes, but it was gone just as fast. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about you, your shop, or even that kid Ethan. You're just a message. A warning." Marcus's jaw tightened. A warning for who? Calloway smirked again, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's the part you don't need to know." Dante shifted beside Marcus, clearly itching to press harder, but Marcus lifted a hand. Asterisk, asterisk, wait, asterisk, asterisk. He could feel it now. The lie sitting just beneath Calloway's confidence. He wasn't the one in charge. He wasn't calling the shots. Someone else was pulling the strings. And that changed everything. Marcus studied Calloway, his mind working. If Calloway wasn't the top of the chain, then who was? And why had they come after him? A random act of hate was one thing, but this was calculated. It was meant to send a message. But to who? Before Marcus could push further, a sudden vibration in Calloway's pocket broke the tension. Calloway pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and for the first time his mask slipped. His smirk vanished, his grip tightened. Marcus saw it, and that was all the confirmation he needed. Someone else was watching. Calloway let out a slow breath, stuffing the phone back into his pocket, his posture changing. "Looks like our little conversation is over," he said, voice lower now, almost resigned. "You should go." Dante frowned. "Oh, so now you're kicking us out?" Calloway didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the men around him, some of them shifting uncomfortably, as if they too had felt the shift in power. Marcus held Calloway's gaze. "You're not in control of this, are you?" Calloway didn't respond, but his silence was an answer all on its own. Marcus took a step back, his mind racing. If someone else was behind this, if Calloway was just a middleman, then the real threat was still out there, and they were watching. Marcus turned on his heel, nodding for Dante to follow. They walked out of the warehouse without looking back, but Marcus could feel the weight of Calloway's stare on his back. The second they were outside, Dante let out a breath. Well, that was intense. Marcus's expression was unreadable. It's not over. Dante frowned. You think he's gonna retaliate? No, Marcus murmured. I think he's afraid. Dante scoffed. Afraid? Of us? No. Marcus glanced back at the warehouse, where the faint glow of light flickered behind the windows. Of whoever was on the other end of that phone call. Dante followed his gaze, realization dawning. So what now? Marcus exhaled, his mind already putting the pieces together. Now we find out who Calloway answers to. But as they made their way back to the truck, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were already one step behind. Whoever was pulling the strings, they weren't done yet. And whatever message they were trying to send, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The drive back was quiet. Too quiet. Dante kept glancing at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, but Marcus was deep in thought, his hands steady on the wheel, his jaw tight. Calloway wasn't the real problem. That much was clear. The real threat was still out there, watching, waiting. Dante finally broke the silence. You think Calloway's gonna run? Marcus shook his head. No, he's too proud for that, but he knows he's in trouble. Dante sighed. So what's the play? We wait for them to make the next move. Marcus didn't answer. His gut told him they didn't have that kind of time. Whoever was behind this, whoever had Calloway scared enough to shut up, wasn't the type to sit back and wait. They'd already made the first move by targeting Marcus's shop. The second move was probably already in motion. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glancing at the unknown number flashing on the screen. He didn't hesitate before answering. Yeah. A voice crackled on the other end. Low, calm, controlled. You should have left it alone, Marcus. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Funny, I was about to say the same thing to you. A slight chuckle. You've caused quite a mess. Calloway was supposed to handle this quietly. Now, look where we are. Marcus's eyes flicked to Dante, who was already pulling out his own phone, trying to trace the number. But Marcus knew they wouldn't get anything. Whoever this was, they were too careful for that. Marcus kept his voice even. Who are you? A pause. Then, you already know. And just like that, the call disconnected. Marcus lowered the phone, his mind racing. That voice, it was familiar. Not just some nameless figure hiding in the shadows. This was personal. Dante leaned forward. Who was it? Marcus exhaled. I don't know yet, but we need to get back to the shop. Now. Something was wrong. They pulled up to the shop minutes later, but before Marcus could even kill the engine, his stomach dropped. The front door was wide open, the glass cracked. Inside, the lights flickered dimly. Marcus was out of the truck before Dante could say a word, moving fast, heart pounding. He pushed through the door, scanning the room. Then he saw him. Ethan. The kid was slumped against the counter, blood dripping from his lip, his breathing shallow. He looked up as Marcus approached, eyes full of fear. I tried to warn you, he rasped. Marcus crouched down. What happened? Ethan swallowed hard. They were here, looking for you. I told them you weren't, but they left a message. Dante scanned the room, spotting a phone left on the counter. He grabbed it, flipping the screen toward Marcus. A single text message was displayed. **** time's up. Meet me where it all started. ***. Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew exactly where that was. The abandoned lot on the south side of town. The same place his shop had first been built. The place his father had once owned, long before Marcus had taken over. The place where everything had started. Dante let out a slow breath. This feels like a trap. Marcus didn't disagree, but he also didn't have a choice. He helped Ethan sit up. Can you walk? Ethan nodded weakly. Just be careful, man. These guys, they're different. Marcus placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. I've dealt with worse. Minutes later, Marcus and Dante were back in the truck, heading toward the lot. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. They both knew what was coming. By the time they arrived, the lot was empty except for a single black SUV parked in the center. The headlights cut through the darkness, blinding for a moment before shutting off. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. ***, James Holloway ***. Marcus hadn't heard that name in years, but he'd never forgotten it. A man from his past. Someone he once trusted. Someone who had betrayed him. Dante tensed beside him. You know this guy? Marcus didn't take his eyes off Holloway. Yeah, I know him. Holloway smiled, stepping forward. It's been a long time, Marcus. Marcus's fists clenched. Not long enough. Holloway chuckled. You always was stubborn. He gestured around. Recognized the place. Thought it was fitting, bringing you back to where it all began. Marcus took a step closer. You sent Calloway after me. Holloway shrugged. Calloway was just the middleman. I needed to see if he was still the man I remembered. Dante frowned. What the hell is this about? Holloway's eyes never left Marcus. It's about power. About control. You think you left that life behind, Marcus. You think just because you built a business, you could forget who you really are. Marcus's jaw tightened. I know exactly who I am. Holloway smirked. Good, then you know how this ends. Marcus felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air, the presence of more men stepping out of the shadows. They weren't alone. Dante cursed under his breath. Yeah, definitely a trap. Marcus's muscles tensed. This wasn't just about his shop. This was bigger, more personal. Holloway wasn't here to send a message. He was here to finish what he'd started years ago. But Marcus wasn't the same man he used to be. And if Holloway wanted a fight, he was about to get one. Marcus stood still, taking in the moment. The air was thick with tension, the kind that weighed heavy on the chest, making every breath feel measured. Holloway's men moved slowly, circling, but Marcus didn't flinch. He had been in worse situations. He had fought battles where the odds were stacked higher, and he had survived them all. Dante was beside him, hands clenched into fists, eyes scanning the surroundings. So what's the plan? He muttered. Marcus's voice was low, steady. We hold our ground. Holloway took another step forward, his smirk widening. You've always been a fighter, Marcus. That's why I liked you. But this? He gestured around them. This was never your world. You're still playing by rules that don't exist anymore. Marcus kept his gaze locked. Maybe, but I still know the difference between right and wrong. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Holloway sighed, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. Always so self-righteous, he glanced toward his men, giving the smallest nod. That was the signal. They rushed forward, but Marcus was ready. He moved fast, quicker than they expected. The first man swung, but Marcus sidestepped, grabbing his wrist and twisting hard. A pained grunt escaped as the man stumbled back. Another came at him, but Marcus ducked, driving an elbow into his gut. Dante was holding his own, dodging a wild punch and landing a solid one of his own. The sound of fists connecting, bodies hitting the ground, it all blurred together. Holloway stood back watching, waiting. Marcus took down the last man with a sharp strike, breathing hard but steady. He turned toward Holloway, who was clapping slowly, mockingly. Impressive, he said, but you know this doesn't change anything. Marcus stepped forward. You talk too much. Holloway's smirk faltered for the first time. He reached for something, his pocket, maybe a weapon, but Marcus didn't give him the chance. He grabbed Holloway by the collar, slamming him against the SUV. Holloway gritted his teeth, but there was no fear in his eyes. Go ahead, he taunted. Take your shot. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. The rage was there, burning deep. But he wouldn't let Holloway dictate how this ended. He wasn't that man anymore. Instead, he let go. Holloway stumbled but caught himself, laughing bitterly. "You really think this is over?" Marcus pulled out his phone and held up the screen. The call was still active, recording everything. Every word, every threat. Holloway's expression changed. Dant smirked. "Yeah, we're done here." Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Marcus hadn't come without a plan. The call had gone straight to an old friend on the force, someone who had been waiting for the right moment to take Holloway down. As the red and blue lights flashed, Holloway's smirk was gone. He knew it was over. The officers moved in fast, taking Holloway and his men into custody. Marcus stepped back, watching as they were loaded into patrol cars. He felt the weight of it all settling over him. Dant let out a long breath. That was intense. Marcus nodded, his mind already shifting. The shop, Ethan, the people who mattered. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about protecting what he had built. As they drove back, the streets were quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like an ending, but also a beginning. Ethan was waiting at the shop, his lips still swollen, but his eyes hopeful. "It's over," he'd asked. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, it's over." Ethan let out a breath, shaking his head. "Man, I thought they were gonna burn this place down for real." Marcus looked around, taking in the space. His space, the place he had fought for. "Not on my watch." Dant clapped a hand on his shoulder. "So what now?" Marcus glanced at him, then at Ethan, then at the shop. The answer was simple. "We rebuild." And with that, they got to work. The world kept moving, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a shop, it was a symbol. A reminder that some things were worth fighting for. And Marcus wasn't done fighting yet.